So in this week, I wanted to go through how to create a 20% gainers list of the last week and then exclude today's from it, because what we're looking for is anything that has popped recently. And like Brady says, within the last 24 to 72 hours, we can look for a secondary bounce. So there's a couple of ways to go about doing it, but I think the easiest way is to start with some smaller building blocks and then start adding them together. And that's always the way to approach more complex problems, because then you can start with something that you know that it works and then add something else that you know that it works, so that it's easier to debug, because the pieces themselves are already working. So one of the things that I want to do is create a percentage here. So in order to have a scan at all, you need to have a plot. We're going to do a daily aggregation so that we can say over the last week, of the daily. So instead of so this is just like a basic plot. This is the most basic plot you can have, but we're going to modify this. So you would just open up your stock hacker window. And then if you don't already have a custom study, you can add a study in the add filter. If you go into study, and then you can go down to custom, and then it'll add in a new thing. If you go to the Think Script editor, now you can make this whatever you want. Just a little recap of the last video about basics. So once you have that open, then you can edit it in here and go to the Think Script editor, and it will, and actually it'll turn off the condition wizard if it gets more complicated than this. You can edit it directly in here, but we're going to be doing more complicated things, so I don't want to mess with that too much. But what we really want is a yes or no answer. What is a weekly gainer? Is this a weekly gainer? Yes or no? Because scans are just about ones and zeros. And just because it's a plot, like plots are about numbers, it'll return a number, but a scan needs to have a yes or no answer so it knows whether to include a stock on the list or not. If this were an indicator, then the plot could be any number, but that's all that you can really do. You can have numbers, and a yes or a no is a 1 or a 0. So if you were to scan this, then our weekly gainers would include everything. I mean, because this is just true, right? So 1 is true, 0 is false. This will just return every stock that there is. I think there's like 16,000 of them, which is not as useful of a list. So what we want to do is add a few conditions here, where, and again, you can use the and keyword to start joining conditions together, or the double ampersand, which means the same thing. And what we want is we want a percentage. So we're going to take our high minus low divided by high, and we want that to be greater than 20%. So with this, we should be able to see a list of everything that has, you can see there's like 860 things here that fit that criteria. So obviously we need to narrow down our search a little bit. And one of the things that I like to do is add in pricing, because I'm only shopping for things that are between $2 and $20 in that range. So we'll add a price minimum. And again, this def keyword, if you're going to create a variable, and it's just like algebra, you write x, and then you write an equation involving x, 3x plus 1, whatever. X is the variable, and in order to define a variable, you need to use this def keyword to define it. So we're going to define a price minimum of $2. So price min 2, and then we're going to define a price max of $20, so that we can keep this within a good range. So we have our 20% gainers, and now we're going to create another condition, and we're going to use a built-in function called between. So what you could do is say close is greater than price min, and then another statement that says close is less than price max, and that would work. But you can also shorthand that with between, and then you can say close, because the first argument of this built-in function is which data set you're doing the between on. And then the first one is the low, so price min. So it's between our price min variable, which up there says 2, and then the third argument to the function is the upper bound. So that's price max. So now what we're going to do is search for, and you can tell, like when you have a correct statement, it will not be read anymore, because again, invalid statement plot. It doesn't tell you what's wrong with it necessarily. You have to look and see that you're missing a bracket or whatever it is. But once you get it right, then it'll lose the red, and then you can hit OK and try your scan again. So this is much more manageable. Actually, 48 is not bad. And you could just stop here and say, okay, this is 20% gainers. But the problem here is this is 20% gainers on the day, and this is just showing us anything that was up, from yesterday. So we need to increase our range a little bit. And you can see that BAOS, this is a cool ticker that Trey had found. It looked like somebody was front loading it. There wasn't any news, and then it just popped up really quickly and ended up, I think doubling just for no really good reason. And it was something that I know happened on Friday. So we'll use that as our little bellwether for whether or not Friday is showing up. So what we need to do is then take this whole weekly gainers and expand it. So the way you do that is by adding a condition called within. So within, now all of a sudden we can give it a range. So we can say within 5 bars, and bars is a keyword that means your candles. So on a daily chart, that's going to be 5 days. This is going to be related to whatever your aggregation is. So whatever your time scale is. So if you pick 4 hours, then you've got 3 bars to work with, or 5 bars to work with. If you're in if you're in the 4 hour, then your 5 bars is only going to include like the last day and then a little bit of the previous day, because there's 16 hours in an extended trading day. And actually that's only if you include the extended hours trading session. Daily doesn't include the extended hours trading session. So, it's just going to exclude any. So if there are any like 20% gainers in after hours that then drop again, this won't pick it up. The only way to pick it up is to do a 4-hour scan. And then you have to deal with a whole bunch of other headaches about, trying to narrow the range and everything else. So we've got our day, if we leave it on day, then within 5 bars is within the last 5 days. And that should restrict this, and actually it'll expand the list that we had, because the list that we had was only Friday. So this should be theoretically bigger. So this is 218. So we've had 218 20% gainers in the last week between $2 and $20, which is, again, it's if we're looking for the weekly gainers, that's a big list. The other thing we want to do though is make sure, because a lot of these things, if you look at this, the volume on this is 0. So ACBM is going to be a garbage chart. It's going to be just like something that somebody front loaded or an insider buy or something happened there that pushed the price up, spiked it, and then without volume, that means that it's not being actively traded. And we don't really care about those. We want Momo. So we're going to want to add a volume criteria to our watch list here. So the other piece of that then is we'll add another variable. So we're going to define volume threshold to be, let's say 1 million, because that's Momo. If you do anything over 0, you're gonna cut out some of these other little garbage tickers, but there's an awful lot in there as well that is just, 140, 485, that's not volume, this is garbage. So now with actually I didn't actually add the volume condition, I just added a variable. So we'll add, we want our volume to be greater than the volume threshold. So the cool thing about this, using the, once you create a variable, it'll automatically add it to the autocomplete list. So you can then just hit enter. So now we're looking for stuff that has decent volume between our $2 and $20, and that has at least a 20% gain. So when we run this should give us a decent list. So 87. So this is actually, I'm starting to recognize a lot of these tickers now from the last week. And they all look like pretty decent ones. I mean, they may not be all that decent right now. I mean, obviously, some of them have gone down quite a bit in the last week. But the important thing is that we've got all of those gainers in one place. So if you wanted to, you could stop here and you could start digging through this list and look for things that might have a decent chart. But what I want to do is set it up so that we're only looking for the gainers that are within the last week, but excluding today, because that way, I mean, we're looking for a 24 to 40 or 24 to 72 hour bounce. I mean, this is like what Brady has said about these momentum plays that have a pop, is that what they'll do often is bounce within, you know, a few days, and then they'll, you know, they can bounce again within a few weeks. So you want to look in the 2 to 3 week range, and then the 24 to 72 hour range. So we're kind of, I mean, given the last week, we're looking at the 24 to 72 hour range. But then the thing is, you can do intersections on scans, and if we want to exclude today's, then the easy way to do that is just to say exclude, you know, create a today's gainers scan, and then it'll show up in here. So you can say, you know, I'm not sure I actually have one. Yeah, today's gainers. So you could actually use this scan to exclude any of today's gainers or the gainers of the last day from this gainers of the last week. But the problem with an exclusion list is that what you're excluding is a ticker symbol. So let's say something ran twice this week, like U1, I think might have had a double peak. And if it ran on Friday, then we want to be able to see U1 for another bounce. So the problem is this will automatically exclude that. We don't necessarily want to do that. I mean, we want to make sure that you know, we want anything in the last week that has popped, just not the things that popped on Friday. So if U1 popped in both, we want to see U1 on a list. So we don't really want to do an exclusion of that. I usually have a warrants list I put together because I don't trade in those. So I usually exclude those on everything anyway. The other thing you can do is an intersection, which is kind of the opposite of an exclusion. It's going to say whatever this scan is creating, then I want to intersect it with another scan. So I've been experimenting with a scan where it's like, show me all the 20% gainers over the last month. And then I have this bottom bouncer scan that I have that kind of shows consolidation. And then if you set that to be for the last week, so I want to see consolidation in the last week. If you intersect that with this, then you're going to see all of the gainers of the last month intersected with the gainer or the consolidators of the last week, which indicates basing. So then what we're looking at is that 2 to 3 week bounce area where it's come back down, it's basing, and now it's getting ready for new higher lows. So anyway, that's kind of a detour. I think I may talk about that one more in another session. But so what we want to do has to do more with our current scan. So we don't necessarily want to exclude everything. We just want to exclude things from today. So this is actually a pretty neat trick, because if you set this up like this, then it's not necessarily obvious how you would exclude yesterday. So if you remember in variables, if you create a variable, say x equals, you know, close, right? This variable is going to be set to the close, but this variable, along with all of the variables, are an array. So you can take something like x with a 0 bracket around it is today. X is also today. So that and this are the same thing. So this is a data set of all of the X's across the entire timeline. But it's also shorthand for the current one. So if you use brackets, it just makes it clearer that 0 is the current one, 1 is the bar previous, 2 is 2 bars previous. If you use negative numbers, then this is the next bar, which may or may not exist if you're on the current bar. And then, so what we want to do though is find out what our daily gainers are. So that would be a 1 on the day. So we need to get this weekly gainers to a point where we can look at only yesterday's and beyond. So the way to do that is to make another variable, because everything references, like variable can be ultimately it has to resolve to a number, but it can reference, it can also be a variable that points to something else. So we can take this entire condition set here and just make it a variable, right? So we'll just say weekly gainers equals gainer, and then define it here as the same thing, right? So this is what we had down on our plot. It's the exact same thing. So you can see we haven't done anything yet. We haven't changed anything about anything. We've just created a variable named gainer that is what our plot was. And the reason we do that is so that we can, and actually if we run this, you'll see that it shouldn't change. We should still have 87 results because all we did was move the variable around. We didn't change anything about it. So we're taking all of the gainers within the last week, so within 5 bars, to exclude just yesterday's gainers. So we're on a daily aggregation here. So if we go gainer 1, what that says is anything with a gainer yesterday in any bar, if it had a gainer yesterday, then we want to pop that up. So what that's going to necessarily exclude is anything with a gainer of 0, which is today, because that doesn't meet the condition, right? So if you had a gainer today, it doesn't meet, well, it would, but I mean, it's not going to be one of these weekly gainers. So this will take out anything that was just ran on the day, but it doesn't take out the ticker from having run earlier in the week. And then you can just make this within 4 bars. So now we're looking at the last week except for today. So we're looking at the yesterdays of the gainer for the last week, because we don't want to include last Fridays. We just want to include Mondays. And then this one should, so like we should still see BAOS is in here, and it only ran on Friday. So a lot of these other ones ran, previously in the week. But we want to see this one disappear from this list because that one only ran on Friday. And that's probably not ready for a bounce. So now you can see we've got 75, which is less than before. And actually, this is maybe a little bit more than I'd want to see. Oh, you know what I did? I didn't. So the other thing about the daily scan is that it doesn't include after hours. And this scan is fine for like a rough estimate. But what we really want to do is instead of just taking the high and low and getting the percentage of the high and low in any day, the way to kind of most things that pop overnight generally hold some of those gains. So if you had something that and it gaps, right? So you'll see that gap up generally. So what we need to do is actually get the compare the high and low. We want the low of yesterday so that it encapsulates that after hours price increase. So the way to do that is to create a variable that is right high of 0. So this is the high of today. So anything, or the high of the last day that we're scanning. So the high is going to be whatever the current high is, and then we want our low to be the lowest between today and yesterday, so that it's whatever the lowest one is going to tell us the biggest range, and that should encapsulate any after hours trading that had happened, because if let's say it doesn't gap up a lot from where it is, or it gaps up from the PM high a day, and then it only moves like 1% or goes down a little bit, it's still a runner. I mean, it could be a 90% runner from the after hours and pre-market, but the daily chart is not going to reflect that. So we just look back one day. So you could do this using another built-in function called min, which is a minimum. So a minimum between low of today and low of yesterday so we're on the daily chart. And that works. The other way you can write this is if it's there's a function that's called lowest. So lowest takes 2 variables. One is the data set, so lowest of the list of all of the lows up to this point, and then we could just say 2 because it's of the last 2 bars. So these end up being the same thing, just different ways of doing things. And this is why having a expanded tool set is nice, because if you wanted to do the lowest of 3 days, this can get really complicated. I mean, you could then take this and make this another minimum statement in here. So like instead of just low 1, you could say the minimum between low 1 and low 2, but it would be easier to just say lowest of 2. So if you want to take the last 3 days gains and search against that instead of just the overnight, then that's this would be the easier way to do it. But since all we're doing is just looking between today and yesterday, we really only need the minimum. And again, this 0 represents today, but this is the same way of saying that because it uses some smarts to say, are you talking about the whole data set or are you just talking about today? Oh, you're just talking about today. Okay, fine. But I like to add the 0 when I'm being explicit about that stuff, only because it helps me remember that we're dealing with data sets here and not just a single variable. And this is referencing just a single variable. So then we can change our equation here to include those highs and lows, which then will be hopefully encapsulating those overnight up gappers, and then refine our list a little bit better. And let's see what we get. Yeah, so now we have we have a lot more coming out of it, and that's fine. I mean, I think that this is maybe more than I want, but this is also 20% gainers. I mean, one of the things that I was noticing when I was playing with this is 20% gainers right now is not even that hard to achieve, because the market's heating up a bit. So if you do a 30% gainer, this will reduce the list to something even a lot more manageable. And this is how, like, when I'm doing these, I'll share these scans, but I tweak them constantly. I mean, like, the market changes too much to just leave a scan at 20%, because next week we could have all 90% runners, and then I want to really refine it to I want the best, so I'm gonna have these 20% gainers here turn into 90% gainers, and really what I want is a manageable list size, because what I'm trying to do is narrow down 16,000 options to 5 or 6, something to follow. So you can see though that BAOS isn't one of these, and that's good, because we're excluding today's. And if you wanted to exclude today's and yesterday's, you could just make this equals gainer 2, and then it will exclude today and yesterday, which should give us, and actually, if you don't change this, you actually could have a bigger list, because then you're including things from last week as well. So we want things that only have this is the 24-hour. So this is actually a pretty decent list. I mean, looking at this list, I could totally see some of these going real soon, because they've gotten to a point where they're looking better. They're actually, I'm curious what Ride did. It had a bankruptcy notice, and it dropped a lot. So then it based, and it looks like it's forming higher lows. So actually, Ride is not looking super bad here from where it was. I mean, it already had the bounce, but this bounce is what we were looking for. So this is a bounce within the last week, and then some basing. So this one, I mean, we probably already missed this move, but I don't know that looking at this chart, I wouldn't have bought it here for sure, because I would have expected it to go down further. But I mean, it is forming higher lows, so that's a sign of strength, even though it went through bankruptcy. Maybe it'll come back. I like Ride. I hope it does. So anyway, so that's the way that you can set up a scan to exclude the last couple of days. So rather than having an exclusion directly, which would just exclude that ticker completely, because obviously, I mean, Ride has over the last month has had a couple of bounces, and if it had really bounced on Friday, we would still want to include this, because there's still a chance that it can go from there. But if you just exclude the whole list of all gainers of the day, then it's going to exclude from the full scan, and we don't want to do that. We just want to exclude individual things, that ran in the last 2 days, which then you have to actually do it from within the scan. So anyway, so that's the gist of it. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is so I was playing on the weekend with a watch list. So this is one of the watch lists that's my today's gainer, which is actually, this is kind of a misnomer. This today's gainer is really It's actually a weekly list. It's just still named today's gainers. I should probably use the weekly gainers. But this is exactly what, like the weekly gainers, this is what we just wrote, right? So if you use this as a watch list, then you can sort it by like percent change and whatever else you want to sort it by, because you you want to see what all the gainers are. So this is kind of what like Trey has a watch list that's just static. And it's whenever anything pops up to the top, it shows up immediately because it's a price change and it's already on your list. So those things happen really quick. If it's just now being added to the scan, like if the scan picks up something new, that can take some time. I mean, Thinkorswim, it depends on the server lag or whatever, but they generally run these things only every 3 minutes at best. So you're not, like I experimented with a 5% pops within the last 3 bars, right? And on a minute chart, I was expecting to basically replace trade ideas. And that didn't work because this scan doesn't run every second, which if it did, that'd be awesome, but then their lag would be even worse on their servers. So this runs whenever it updates scans on their servers, and that doesn't really help me. So I never use this anymore because it's a pointless scan unless you sit there on the scan and you just keep hitting scan. You're not gonna really see any changes there. So if you have a more expansive list like this one, which I think I mean, this is huge. This is probably 1,000 tickers over the last week. And this is things that have risen over 20%. So these are generally gonna be Momo tickers, and I try to compare them to Trey's list whenever he's on, just to see what's in his list and why my stuff isn't on the list. And he's got some hand curated things in there that are like below $1, which probably didn't used to be below $1 because I know he doesn't like to buy things that low. And I don't either, so I just exclude them automatically. I mean, if it comes back up, it'll show up on my list eventually, but I don't care. But what I did want to do is, like, let's say you have this, something like BAOS, which, it's up almost 60% here. But it's actually, it hasn't done that recently. And the way that this filtering would work, the way Trey uses the filtering is that when something gets up in his range, he starts noticing it. Once it's up within the 20s here, if he sees new tickers up in here, then he'll start paying attention because he knows it's rising. But that's actually kind of late. I mean, what if it was down 50% and it's just risen 10%? A 10% pop is huge, right? But I mean, it's not going to show up on your list here, and trade ideas would tell you, but until it gets up into the green, you're not going to see it here. So what I learned, and I'm still testing this out, but what I learned is that you can add your own custom columns, and you can actually use script in it, like it's a limited set, but you can create your own. And the way you do that is you go into this customize in the gear, just like you're going to add a column, because that's what you're doing. And the column that you're looking up is actually called custom. So it has this whole list. You get 20. I already used one of them, so that once you use all of these, then I think that's it. It's not, you can't just keep adding more. But the cool thing is that once you add this, like this is one that I added this, and I renamed it to Pops, because if you click on this script icon, then it pops up our familiar ThinkScript editor. So you can rename it. You can set the aggregation time. So this is the thing that's cool, because I can set it to 5 minutes. Do I want to see all the pops in the last 5 minutes? And I wanted to look at the ones in the last 30 minutes because that gives me a little more time to let the chart set up and have it be kind of neat. So other than that, though, I mean, like this is just the familiar ThinkScript. So we've got all our familiar variables. So what I've added in here was the range of 5. This is how many bars I want to look. On the 30-minute, that's going to give us about 2 hours window to see these things. And that is, I mean, you can tweak all of these things too to make it whatever you want. And then the percent target is 1, and this is kind of arbitrarily low because the thing is, so what this is going to do is this is going to output a number, right? So this is like a indicator. It isn't a yes or no question because it's not a scan. It's going to output a number, right? I mean, we want to see what the percent is, but we need to be able to put it within a range. We need to do this within statement. So you have to have something for it to hold on to, but not everything, because you can't just say, output the I mean, I guess you could, maybe I've made this overcomplicated, but you could just say, output anything that had a, that was a gainer, which is the percent change is greater than percent target within 5 bars. And if it's a gainer, then give us the percent change. And actually, probably what I could have done was just, plot gainers equals percent change, and we wouldn't even need the range bars because it's going to be within this. But the reason I wanted a range is because, let's say I set this on 1 minute. If I am not looking at this during that minute that it pops and then it drops a little, I'm not going to see it. So that's why you want the range. So it's like, show me everything within the last 5 minutes that's done this. That gives you a better idea. So if like you miss the initial pop, when it happens, you can still see what's going on and let the chart form up. So that's kind of the thing here. What this piece does, this assigned value color is just going to change the color of the output, which helps you be able to see it a little bit better. You can also change the background color, which makes it a lot more dramatic. But I just wanted to kind of say, if it's above 5%, then I really want to see it. And if it's above 3%, then yeah, I guess it's fine. Otherwise, we'll just leave it white. And if it's not even above 1%, then leave it at 0, because I don't really care about those losers. So anyway, so that, it's just this is just creating a percentage, checking for the percentage within 5 bars. And this is on the 30-minute. I'm just going to hit cancel so I don't actually save that. So the cool thing about this is, so this is my weekly gainers list, right? And I'll use this during the day because anything that's a daily gainer is generally at the top of this list anyway. But again, if I've got something that's because this is like 1,000 tickers, this is all of the stuff that Momo cares about is on this list. Just about everything. I mean, except for something that's maybe been basing for 10 years. But even then, they usually pop a little bit before they really rip. And so that would show up here. And more importantly, I want to see it even if it's down at the bottom, because the bottom here is pretty far. I mean, there's stuff on here that has dropped in the last day, but once it starts ripping, I want to know. Like this. Here's a great example. This SCON here is down here. It's down like 20%, but it's in the last 2 hours, it's popped 10%. That's something worth looking at. So you can just sort on pop, and then everything shoots up to the top. That I mean, this is actually pretty cool. So now you can see like MDIA, that was already pretty high up, but this SCON pops up nearly to the top, and you would never have seen that if you were just like using Trey's system of watching things as they get up. And to be honest, I think that once they get up to the 20s, then they've proved themselves. They've actually given us confirmation that they're running. But I wanted to be able to see these things a lot sooner. I wanted to be able to run this out. Oh, TOS just froze on me. I want to be able to see these things when they happen, so I can make a more informed decision about what's going on. And you can see that like definitely, I mean, this thing has tanked really far. But and actually this is on the daily. Let me look at something more interesting. Like let's look at the minute. So in the minute chart, this is down. I mean, this is nowhere near a red to green move, but it is pushing up, and you can see that like it's forming a higher low here. So this is, if this has some momentum behind it, this is actually worth looking at. I mean, this is just because it's at the bottom of the list, just because it's -20 for the day doesn't mean that it can't make big moves. And that's what this watch list is trying to do. So the things that I've discovered about this trick is that you only get 1,100 calls. And that's over the entire app. So if you do this in more than one watch list, you're going to start seeing error messages in here, like not like limit exceeded or something like that. And that's because that's just a hard limit they've set, and you can't. It's like subscription limit set, which is a funny way of putting it because it makes you think you can subscribe and get more calls, but that's not actually the case. They've just set it arbitrarily at 1,100. So if you have more than 1,100, some of them just won't show up. So this does have to go out to the server. So this is kind of checking in a vacuum. So I mean, this has to make a round trip to the server to do that calculation. So we're going to see whether that's faster than actually having a scan. I'm going to test this out next week and see if it works. But it is very cool though to be able to set whatever conditions you want and sort your watch list on those conditions, because they can be anything. I mean, you can sort on anything. I mean, that's the thing that I think is really cool about this, is like, this is now another tool I can have in my tool chest where if I am looking at a watch list and I'm like, hey, it'd be neat to be able to do this, but I can't make an exclusion or intersection. Oh, I know, I'll it's just a sorting thing. I'll just sort on a different criteria, and it's custom. You can sort it on whatever you want. I mean, I could actually make my own percent change custom column to do this. I mean, I'd only want to have one active at once, because obviously that limit is pretty hard. Unless you limit the scan. I mean, that's the other thing, is this today's gainer scan is 1,000, but I could limit it to 500, and then that would be a little more responsive. But then I'm missing out on the actual low hanging fruit, like the stuff that should be way down at the bottom, but that this one wouldn't show up on that scan. So it's kind of a balancing act. But anyway, so that's what I've got for today. Unless somebody else has any questions or anything, then I think I will end it here and then put this up on YouTube. All right. Well, I will talk to you guys later.